Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara. Episode 4. Shri Mahaswami, the sage with eyes of light, the diary of a seeker of truth, Dr.Serge Demetrian. Dear devotees, now we shall listen to the prologue. Ho, experience that is lived, when established in a state beyond speech and feeling, teach me how to describe you to others. Manika Vasagar, Trivasagam, verses 22-3. In history, as in physics, let us judge by the facts. Chateaubriand. Prologue. The Garden of Wisdom. It was called the Garden of Wisdom. It was that very secret place, so difficult to attain. People have ceased to believe in it, although the elders, they who always have time to waste, still talk about this garden. They would recount to their grandchildren the ancient story of a far distant place, visited only by saints and sages, somewhere in the inaccessible great snowy mountain in the north of India. It was said that concealed there were all the marvels of the world, accompanied by the feeling of bliss, so much so that one would be transformed into that bliss if one only succeeded in entering the realm. Those who had reached this heavenly world rarely returned, and so there was nobody who could convey what was to be seen in that most wondrous place. However, 4 youngsters decided to try their luck. Parents, friends, inhabitants of that land attempted in vain to dissuade them, but had to give in before their unshakable resolution. At last, the local people acquiesced, but with a condition. We shall help you to come near your garden, but in return you shall come back and tell us what you have seen. All the 4 earnestly promised. A heavily loaded convey was organized of men, buffaloes and donkeys. As the way ahead was long and the return uncertain, the best scribe of the country was taken along, accompanied by his 2 assistants and followed by a mule staggering under the weight of writing materials. So great was the fame of the place they were determined to penetrate the secret of. After a long journey across unknown regions, always towards the north of the country, the expedition, guided by the stars, reached one evening the woody edge of a river in torrent flowing from west to east. No further advance was possible. The following day, at dawn, the travelers were gathered to consider their predicament, when one of their number hailed them from a distant point at the bank of the torrential river. He pointed across the waters to the left. There, the first rays of the sun brilliantly revealed an immense wall crowned by a tiny silvery haze. Nothing seemed to move, but in the heights, very far away, almost lost in the growing light of the day, they saw a solitary eagle slowly flying in large circles just above the spot where the men stood gathered. The peace which reigned could be felt until on the right side of the water, where the travelers looked in awe, there arose cries of joy. The garden of wisdom. Finally, we have reached it. The jubilation was more so as the garden seemed to hover so near, hardly 3 stone throws away. Some climbed up the trees to inspect the area, but alas, what they saw were nothing but difficulties. Dark ravines, rocks with sharp edges, deceitful swamps, and thick bushes of thorny brambles that covered the entire surface up to the base of the wall. It seemed impossible to advance. The wall, about some 40 feet high and built of rough boulders of stone, looked rather like a fortress. It appeared from the west and changed its direction towards the north, where it seemingly dissolved in the morning mist. Undaunted, the 4 young men took leave of their friends, all the while repeatedly promising that they would return. They loaded a raft with what they would require for the expedition: ropes, crampons, and other tools. However, as soon as they left the right side of the river, the strong current swept them along towards whirlpools, and the small boat overturned and broke up on a stony corner. With great difficulty, the 4 reached the other side with almost nothing from what they had originally carried. They headed towards the wall empty-handed. "May God protect you. Do return safely. We will return. Rely on us." The brave 4 plunged into the tangle of obstacles, while their friends perched in the trees followed them with their eyes as far as possible, for the youngsters were often out of sight as they entered caves, crevasses, or passed behind sheer rocks. In the end, all 4 touched the base of the wall. The most arduous part now stood tall and forbidding before them. Nevertheless, what hurdle can hinder pure-hearted ones? They did not crave to possess or to exploit anything. They wanted only to know and share with others their experience. The first one, helped by the other 3 and cheered on by his friends who were watching from the other side of the torrent, succeeded in reaching the top of the wall and hauled himself up. The glimpse he caught of the interior of the garden multiplied by 10 his physical resources, and with a single thrust he plunged into the garden without uttering a syllable. A long shout of frustration rang out behind him from the others who watched. The next one reached the top of the wall and stood there for a moment. The onlookers had begun to hope he would not forget his promise. He could be seen raising his arms, but it was only to jump into the garden while letting out a long cry of joy. The 3rd followed the way of the 2 first ones. Hardly had he addressed a gesture of helplessness to those left behind than he disappeared. The men of the convoy on the other side of the raging river were appalled. The condition of the last one, the eldest of the quartet, was the toughest, as he had to work alone. He considered the steep, smooth wall from the bottom to the top, and then his look went beyond the top of the wall, for there in the heights, towards the clouds, a royal eagle soared alone above the earth in the vast sky. The stream of his life's memories quickly flashed through the young man's mind. His many years' efforts, his trials to arrive at the point where he stood at that moment. I must succeed, he said to himself, and a powerful gleam sparkled in his pupils. Then, barehanded, he darted towards the last obstacle. The task set before him seemed insurmountable. From the right side of the river, his friends looked on with suspended breaths. Even the birds and the squirrels ceased to move. The torrent seemed to have slowed down his speed, and the mule of the scribes shook its old head with a perplexed air. Only the chief of the scribes had the presence of mind to hastily scribble on his tablets a record of the event. The young man, pressed against the wall with clenched hands and nails on the rock, advanced at a snail's pace up the sheer rock. To him and to those who looked on, time had ceased to exist. Finally, the impossible occurred. He was up on top of the cliff, lying face down. A clamor rose from the right side of the barrier of the river. Do not forget us. We are here. You have pledged not to leave us out. Devotees, let us close this episode here and shall return to continue the prologue in the coming episode, bowing at the holy feet of the Gurus. Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara.